Because they would name something that they already named earlier. Okay, so we're about to start. What?
Oh, thanks. Sorry. I wasn't in the right spot for the camera. So we have a lot of guests tonight, so we're really appreciative of that. So tonight's a little bit different as we're in a different room, and we have a guest speaker, Joy Hunter. So yes, we're super excited about that, and I'm going to plug her ministry real quick because it's amazing. So she is the co-host for the podcast Sheologians. If y'all haven't heard of it, Sophie can hype it up a lot more than I can, but I've listened to some of them, and it's really, really good. So I recommend that, first of all. Next, the upcoming meeting. So next meeting, we'll have Nate presenting on Mormonism, and then we'll have just hang out at Sherwin and Elizabeth's house after that. But we're giving away 3 free books tonight. Actually 2, because I'm going to give this one to Brody since he actually gave us contact with Miss Joy. So raise your hand if you are a first-time guest to Ratio Christi. Oh, I saw her hand first, but for those of you who are left, who would like a book on abortion? Sophie, you get the other one. Okay, Allison? Okay, that's fine. Anyway, so I'm going to turn it over to Miss Joy Hunter, and yeah.
Hello. I have kind of a low-tone voice, so if any point people in the back can't hear me, just like give me a signal, you're being quiet. That's kind of a little more my tendency, and I am used to talking into a microphone, so don't usually have to worry about my own personal volume. But as he said, I'm Joy Hunter. I live in West Monroe. I think we're just about at our year of being in Louisiana. I live here with my husband, my daughter, and then we also have another on the way, which we're very excited about. Yeah, good things to celebrate. So I love talking about feminism, but I do typically talk about feminism with my friend. So when I was putting this together, my thought was kind of, we're just all going to be friends today, and we're just going to have a good time. We're going to talk about feminism. It may be new to some of you, and then some of you guys may be like, I already know all this stuff, and you're the experts. Welcome. So y'all are just my friends today, and we're just hanging out. I am going to go ahead and start with a definition of feminism. That is what I'm talking about. That's what I was asked to talk about. It's kind of my thing. This is not the official definition of feminism, but I find a lot of the definitions to not be completely accurate or honest. There is kind of that generic definition, which is just the idea that men and women are equal. And then even the technical, I guess, the Oxford definition calls it an advocacy, which kind of just means supporter. An advocate is a supporter. But I think it goes a lot further than that. Candidly, I would say it's closer to a religion, but for the sake of my definition tonight, I defined it as a philosophy, and I will explain that. So I'm going to give you my definition, and then I'll kind of break it down in case my husband says sometimes I use big words. I don't know. I feel like you guys all know the big words, but we'll see. I will try to clear up any confusion. So my own personal definition of feminism is a philosophical ideology seeking to liberate women from inherent societal inequalities. So the reason I define it as philosophical is because it claims a belief about the nature of knowledge and existence. And by extension, that means it claims to know about everything that exists, which is why I feel like it's a religion. But regardless, So the next part of the definition I have is seeking to liberate women. So feminism believes that women are fundamentally under the thumb of men. They are a marginalized group oppressed by patriarchy, which I would define as a culture built for and by men. And since women are oppressed, they are not free. Because of fourth wave feminism and intersectionality, I would have to say that while my definition uses the word women, I would obviously expand that now to include what they would call any marginalized or oppressed group, which is no longer just women. Okay, so then the next part of my definition was inherent social inequalities. And so feminism believes that gender is a construct, that men, society, or patriarchy have created and defined male and femaleness and have assigned women beneath them. All right, that's my definition. Hopefully, I was good at explaining that. Now, what I was asked to do is attempt a brief history, which I have talked about the history of feminism in the span of 10 hours, done it in less time, usually takes me a long time. There's a lot to cover, but I guess in the context of my talk, it may not seem all that brief, but there's really so much to know. I'm just going to try to give you guys the very basics. I'm going to give you a timeline when each wave occurred, and some of these are a little debated, but it's close, and I'll do my best. And then I'm going to give some of the primary goals of each wave, along with some of the major players and the major players' own words. Really, feminists are best read in their own words these days because they are so heroic to our culture that you're not always going to get the most honest interpretation of what they believed or who they were even. There's a lot that's skipped about each wave, but definitely the first and second wave, just because they are kind of a part of legitimate history, whereas the third and fourth are still kind of happening right now. But then I will offer at the end of each wave what I hope are some wise observations about each of those waves. And here we go. So obviously we're going to start in the first wave. The longest wave, they start to get pretty short after the first wave. But I'm going to go ahead and officially kick off the first wave in 1792 when Mary Wollstonecraft wrote A Vindication of Women's Rights. And that was largely accepted as the start of the women's rights movement. Mary Wollstonecraft is the mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, which my friend Summer, who I do the podcast with, firmly believes that Frankenstein is about feminist shame and guilt. Very interesting. But she was definitely raised by a feminist, lived as a feminist, just like her mom, and received many of the benefits of that. Anyway, she was English, so I guess technically I need to mention that American feminism began at the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. It was in New York, and a bunch of ladies got together and kind of created an alternate Bill of Rights type thing, and they basically wrote out what they wanted to happen, the change they wanted to see, and then a bunch of them signed it. And then the first wave ends around 1960. So 1792 to 1960. Kind of a long run. Definitely these ladies were the ones that paved the road for the feminists after them, and they did a lot of work, and a lot of them were willing to they were willing to be the firsts and maybe be ridiculed or beat up a little bit in order to get feminists where they were trying to go. So where were they trying to go? The primary goals of the first waivers were temperance and prohibition, which of course is the regulation and outlawing of alcohol. They also were interested in increased women's property rights. Women everything fell under their husband's name, so women didn't, well, it's funny because what they would say is women didn't own anything. My perspective is that women owned everything, they just owned it through their husband, which they were one flesh with. So there's kind of a perspective difference there, obviously. But that might seem a little bit scary to some of our modern ears, but I'm going to hopefully give you some observations at the end of this wave, and then at the very end that will make you feel a little bit better about scary women not being able to own their own stuff. And then, of course, the increased right to education, and then suffrage. That's the big one. The women's rights movement, which of course was also known as the women's suffrage movement, which eventually became feminism. And suffrage was closely linked with slavery abolition. Just so you know. Sounds good, right? Sounds nice. Sounds sweet. Old-timey. So now I'm gonna give you some quotes just to kind of give you the idea of what these ladies were about. It's not my interpretation. These are their words that came out of their mouths. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton, one of the big first waivers, said, "The only points in which I differ from all ecclesiastical teaching is that I do not believe that any man ever saw or talked with God. I do not believe that God inspired the Mosaic Code or told the historians what they say he did about women." So she had a little problem with many things except for just anything that was said about women. "For all the religions on the face of the earth degrade her, and so long as woman accepts the position that they assign her, her emancipation is impossible." So there you go. The Bible is not inerrant, and it is specifically designed to subjugate women. She also said, "Our religion, laws, customs are all founded on the belief that woman was made for man." Genesis does have something to say about that, though that may, to some of our modern ears, sound a little scary. She did not believe the Bible. That's my point. So Susan B. Anthony, also very well known. This is a very simple quote, but very meaningful. Hope it will be extra meaningful by the end of the talk. "Independence is happiness." And she really meant that. That might sound like kind of a Pinterest post type thing, but she really did mean independence is happiness. She was single, and she despised the institution of marriage and wanted to be independent in order to be happy. All right, I also have a little tidbit from the Declaration of Sentiments, which was that document that I was talking about that was presented at Seneca Falls. "The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward women, having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her." And finally, my favorite feminist, Lucy Stone. Well, I should say first wave feminist. Lucy Stone, she was the morning star of the women's rights movement. She wrote, "In education, in marriage, in religion, in everything, disappointment is the lot of women. It shall be the business of my life to deepen this disappointment in every woman's heart until she bows to it no longer." So this came from her speech, which she surprisingly titled, "Disappointment is the lot of women." So, my observations: these women did not believe the Bible to be inerrant, as I had said. Many of these women believed in free love and loathed the institution of marriage. Even the ones that were married loathed the institution of marriage, which to me means they hated their husbands, which is not allowed. Anyway, it's also worth mentioning on this point that many increased property and custodial rights that they were seeking were directly tied to the desire for easier divorce. They believed that a woman should not stay married to a man longer than he served her purposes. So there was this kind of scary narrative presented, which is that if a woman were to be divorced by her husband, she couldn't have custody of her kids, right? But we just want to keep in mind that that's not entirely true, because the reason they were seeking all this liberation was so that they could leave their husbands. Again, they hated their husbands. Which it's very weird, because during this time, a lot of this stuff was delivered in speech form, and so sometimes they would be saying this stuff and their husbands were just sitting right there. I don't know how that would feel. That would probably be a little awkward. Anyway, so these women were Enlightenment thinkers. They were rationalists, so they believed that knowledge came from their own logical reasoning, specifically as opposed to religious belief. That was the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was not just about freeing the mind. It was about freeing the mind in rejection of superstitious religious thought. Which nowadays, the Enlightenment's like the best thing that ever happened, right? Very interesting. Because they believed that logical reasoning is how you procured knowledge, this is why they were pushing for women to be further educated. Again, there's this thing, it's not bad for women to be educated, but the point of them wanting more education is that if she was educated, she was equipped for liberation. And that idea is a trend that continues into all the waves, and it's a little pretentious and snobby to me, because with it comes the assumption that women who disagree with them are just not free and are just burdened under the weight of religious thought. So the big reason I love the first wave feminists is that we tend to think of them as Christians. We tend to think of them as, like, in their hats and their curls and their, just like an old photo, but that's not who these ladies were, and I think it's important that we just acknowledge them for who they are. And as they had a dangerous message of discontentment. Like I said, they hated their husbands. Many of them abandoned their children. They actually practiced what they preached, which was horrible. But I mainly too just want to impress that these were, despite the narrative that women were oppressed, these were women that were educated. These were hardworking women, and they saw what they wanted, which was freedom from their husbands and families, and they went for it. And as you can see, they were rather successful. They were willing to start in 1792 and put in the work until they saw things come to fruition hundreds of years later. Okay, the second wave. How long am I taking? I should have okay, all right. I gotta move fast, but I'm trying to not just, like, sometimes my thing is, because you're just talking in a big quiet room, you feel like you need to fill every empty space. But I'm trying to pause and be a human. Okay, so the second wave started. It'll be easier because now the next waves are like a few decades long. Plenty of stuff happened, but anyway. So the second wave starts in the 1960s and ends in the early 1980s. So this was a particularly interesting time for women because many women worked and many women voted, and there was a lot of increased property rights, and there was lots of increased education. So even the first wavers were seeing the fruits of their labor at this point. There was also a boom in time-saving domestic appliances like washing machines and stuff that just made your life a lot easier. They bought clothes instead of making them, and ready-made food or eating out was more accessible, more available. So life had really changed. There was a lot of things that women were pretty much used to spending their entire day doing that was now done for them. Oh, and kids went to school. That was another big thing. So this is all great. I think all those things are good things. Those are signs of a thriving culture, innovation that leads to more time to do good things and to do good work, right? But I think that also it kind of created this fertile soil for discontentment and boredom that definitely allowed some feminist messages to really sink in. So there was something about the second wave that was just really primed. There was a lot of factors, but with the Great Depression and World War II, this was just kind of a very interesting time. So the goals of the second wave were increased workplace rights, that undeniably one of the goals, but so things like pregnancy, discrimination, don't fire me if you find out I'm pregnant, that kind of thing, equal pay, affirmative action, equal value in the workplace was another goal. Of course, the sexual revolution, which led to legal birth control and abortion access. And then one of the biggest sort of emotional or inner man goals of the second wave was the freedom to actualize and realize potential. So Betty Friedan, pretty much the face of second wave feminism, she wrote The Feminine Mystique, said, "The problem that has no name," which was the feminine mystique, which is simply the fact that American women are kept from growing to their full human capacities, is taking a far greater toll on the physical and mental health of our country than any known disease. Kate Millett said, "We're more sexually repressed than men, having been given a much more strict puritanical code of behavior than men ever have." And Gloria Steinem said, "We've begun to raise daughters more like sons, but few have the courage to raise their sons more like our daughters." Germaine Greer said, "It takes a great deal of courage and independence to decide to design your own image instead of the one that society rewards. But it gets easier as you go along." So, my observations. The further we move through this wave, the focus becomes much less about obedience to self. That was very much a first wave tenet. Obedience to self. I don't need to be obedient to my husband. I need to be obedient to me. Stopped being as much about that and started being more about exploration of self, which is why I mentioned the freedom to actualize or realize potential. So, some explored the full potential of women in education and the workforce, because now they have the ability and increased involvement in education and work. And others explored the emotional and, of course, sexual potential of women. The idea was that man wasn't just free to work, he was free to discover himself and his humanity however he chose, free from judgment. So women, in order to be equal, that's always what we're aiming for here, right? Women needed the same experiences to reach the same potential and discover their humanity as well. Also worth mentioning, I didn't include this in my timeline, but it is very interesting to me. So in 1963, you really see the first instance of just the idea that introduced that gender is a social construct separate from biological sex. So that's kind of taken hold very recently, but 1963 is really when we started seeing that definition more circulated. And of course, who is circulating it? The feminists. They love that stuff. Related, so I think in my mind, how I would put it is that at this point there was another shift from men and women should be equal to men and women are the same. So those two things sound kind of similar, but they are different, and we'll kind of discuss that at the end too. All right, the third wave. The third wave takes place between the mid to late 1800s, or 1800s, 1980s, sorry, and 90s. So again, pretty short. We're getting shorter and shorter as we go. So why are we shifting? Why do we need to have a shift to a new wave so soon? Well, many considered the second wave of feminism to be the white housewives feminism, but not all women are white or middle class or housewives or even women. So proper feminism had to benefit the oppressed, full stop. Not just the middle class white oppressed. So we needed to, feminism needed to be reborn to include many more types of oppression, not just the female kind. We did have, this is an important part of the third wave, riot girl feminism. I'm sure if you guys know anything about feminism, you know something about it. It didn't really last all that long, but it was definitely very much just about bucking gender norms, an alternative lifestyle, being crude, punk, being late, just kind of shocking and promiscuous and drunk, and there was lots of slam poetry and punk music, and it didn't really last that long because it was too white, and that's just not what we wanted anymore. So yeah, it didn't, the empowerment, so the third wave, many feminists acknowledge that Riot Girl achieved empowerment for women. It followed all the rules, but the empowerment didn't resonate because it didn't include the unique struggles of other oppressed groups, like, so if you're black, gay, in a wheelchair, trans, whatever. So this, of course, leads me, we have to have a conversation about the third wave's biggest contribution, and I would say goal. I'm going to include it in the goals, which were intersectionality. So intersectionality is what feminism is now. So they're the same thing. As I keep going, I'll probably keep calling it feminism, but I do still mean intersectionality. Sometimes I'll say both. It's the same thing. So the term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and basically, I just want you guys to think of it as the overlapping that occurs when a person is a part of multiple oppressed groups. So some people are marginalized because they're women, and some people are marginalized because they're black, trans, that kind of thing. So those two people, even though they're just one intersection away from each other, they have two different experiences, and they require different types of justice. My friend Carla from the book club that we run says intersectionality is like standing in an intersection, and the more cars that hit you, the more important you are. I'll let Carla know that got a laugh. I was like, she said that one day, and I was like, taking that, adopting that. I will give you credit though. Thank you, Carla. Another goal was, of course, destruction of hierarchies. Feminism has always been anti-authoritarian, which we can even see in my presentation of the first wave, but now they're like really, really about it, and we'll discuss why at the end. And then of course I would say one of the major goals of the third and fourth wave is restitution. We don't totally know what that looks like. Nobody's given us a really great idea of what that looks like, but restitution, of course, is repayment for wrongs. I would say perceived wrongs is kind of how it works now. But yeah, so some quotes I have a quote from Rebecca Walker. So Rebecca Walker she's my favorite third wave feminist. And it's because I don't know if she's a feminist anymore. And because of that, she's said some really interesting things that really kind of damage feminism's reputation. But so her mom was Alice Walker, the author of The Color Purple, who is a prolific feminist and civil rights activist. And they did not have a good relationship. Her mom really hated having a daughter and wasn't very secretive about it. And that led Rebecca on a path for sure. She got an abortion when she was young, 14, and what's interesting about her is that she later on in life did have a child and wrote a book all about it. And she really condemned a lot of what her mom lived, what her mom and her lived out during their feminist careers. So I have to include this quote because I like her, but also because she is the one. So there was some. I'm tempted to. Okay, so we in book club we are reading Rosaria Butterfield's 5 Lies of Our Anti-Christian Age, which I would highly recommend. But so she has a footnote where she references the Westminster Catechism. I'm a Baptist, so I don't often get to peek into there, but because of Rosaria, I did, and we discovered a word that we now love, which is vain jangling. And vain jangling just means vain squabbling. But so that was happening. There was some vain jangling going on about what to call the third wave because a lot of people didn't feel represented by the second wave, so they kind of wanted to call it post-feminist, post-feminism. Like, it's dead. We're done with that. We can make a new thing now. But Rebecca Walker came out. She came out and she said in an article in Ms. Magazine, which used to be magazines used to be more popular in general, I suppose, but that Ms. Magazine originally started in the second wave as a feminist publication. But so she said this: turn that outrage into political power. Do not vote for them unless they work for us. Do not have sex with them. Do not break bread with them. Do not nurture them if they don't prioritize our freedom to control our bodies and our lives. I am not a post-feminist, feminism feminist. I am the third wave. So we call it the third wave basically because of Rebecca Walker. She came out, she was 22 years old, so wise, so much life she had lived. But, she was an adult from a very young age. So I don't know, I guess I won't tease her too much, but that's why we call it the third wave. That's why we don't call it post-feminism. We call it the third wave because of Rebecca Walker. She then started a whole third wave organization which still exists today, and it's called the Third Wave Fund. And on its website, they state, "We believe that lived experience generates wisdom, creativity, and expertise. The most impacted by oppression are best positioned to design and lead the way towards justice." So, my closing thoughts on the third and fourth wave are kind of going to be a little bit shorter just because we're approaching my ultimate observations at the end. But during this time, feminism was still a little grungy and alternative and kind of cool in like an underground type of way. It was widely accepted in lots of academic circles, of course. That's really where feminism pretty much always lived, was in higher education. But it still doesn't have the shiny veneer that it's about to have in the fourth wave. So we shall move on to the fourth wave, which is where we are now. And I have no idea when it officially started. I really couldn't tell you. I guess that's why people vain jangle about these things. But I can tell you some kind of notable moments. Again, these aren't start dates or anything like that, but I would say that an enormous moment in the fourth wave and in our culture in general was the Obergefell decision, the legalization of gay marriage in 2015. There was the hashtag #MeToo movement in 2018, which was, of course, highly feminist. Lots of celebrities came out with sexual abuse and harassment allegations toward one specific guy, but then everyone kind of came out and they all encouraged everyone else to come out with their abuse stories, and they didn't necessarily want to define what abuse really was. Some of it was not totally substantiated, and a lot, I mean, there's plenty of legitimate horrible stuff that happened. We actually have a, Sheologians has an episode called #Feminism, and it was actually a feminism true crime that I did, and it was all about the #MeToo is a true crime story, because it didn't really get any legitimate victims justice. And also Hollywood is the one that is, Hollywood, there seems to be lots of perpetrators in Hollywood, and Hollywood also tells you to never share your abuse. So that gives me big roomy vibes. And so #MeToo is while considered a success of the fourth wave, I think it really reveals a lot of the true intentions of feminists, always. And then, of course, something that happened somewhat recently was BLM riots. I don't know what the situation was like here in little towns. We had some rioting near us, but we lived in a major city at the time. Okay, so if you want to see the fourth wave, you really can just reach out and touch it. I personally call this wave, no one else. Again, here I am. I'm just defining lots of, you guys invited me here to talk, so I get to do my thing, right? So I personally call the current wave we're in the activist wave, because we have been activated. Social media, specifically Instagram and TikTok, gave feminism this enormous media upgrade. Feminism has always understood the importance of media and activism. Like I said, feminism kind of always lived in higher education. They always understood that if you could write newspapers, if you could write magazines, if you could give speeches, if you could get your words out there in whatever way was available to you at the time, you could make a difference. And they're right. They're absolutely right. We know this to be true. But social media, just like I said, there was this boost. It allowed feminism to go just hyper mainstream. We consume more media because it's easier to consume it. We have more influencer types, whereas there may have, in the first, second, even third wave, you may have had to be somewhat of a celebrity and have some kind of a presence in order for people to want to consume the media that you were producing. But that's not how it is so much anymore. Really anyone, even by accident, if you just go viral, can become an influencer. And nowadays, we are marketed ideas as often as we are products. That's just a part of influencer and brand culture. And so I would say, I mean, I could give you a list of the notable major players of the fourth wave, but I would say you could probably think of them, and it's pretty much everyone. Anyone who has somewhat of a following, even if it's a minimal following, is propagating these ideas. Okay, so we finished. How long did that take me? Are you guys all bored? Hopefully not. I guess if you're bored, don't tell me. Why would I ask that? Okay, so we talked about a definition, and we talked about the history. I tried to make it brief. I hope you guys learned something from that, and that I didn't just repeat everything you already know. But I really did all that leading up to, I kind of loosely titled this talk, The Fruit of Feminism. And so I really want to talk about what feminism produces, which we just talked about the history of it, so you can you guys are all alive. You can see what's going on. You can see the fruit. But we're just going to go through it a little bit. Okay. All right. So feminism produces a false anthropology of man, which sounds a little, I don't know, scholastic, but it's pretty simple. Anthropology of man is really just the question, what is a man? Who is he? What is he? This, for as long as feminism has lived in higher education, this seems like a very simple answer that they should have this question figured out, right? But they don't, because they have a bad standard. So feminism claims that man creates himself through knowledge and experience, which we talked about. So what you know, what you reason in your head, and what you experience, the things you've been through, or that's also tied to your oppression status. So even just the identity groups that you belong to, that is what makes you who you are. So the more you can know and feel, the more of humanity you experience, which is why I like to use the word actualize, because it sort of creates this like climbing up the ladder type thing. Like at the end of our lives, we'll fully have realized our humanity. And so you just slowly work your way up by traveling, being promiscuous, whatever. That's kind of there's different answers for how you do that. But those are some of them. And it also claims that humanity is androgynous. So we talked a little bit about how there was this shift from men and women, let's make men and women equal, to let's make men and women the same. So androgyny, if I know what androgynous is because it was really popular when I was growing up with like models. So everyone that you would see on magazine covers and stuff, lots of famous people, you're meant to have this sort of non-masculine, non-feminine look. You might even share some different, you might have some more masculine traits, more feminine traits, but the idea is that you are without masculinity or femininity. And then, of course, a similar word that some of you may be more familiar with is non-binary. So non-binary refers to the gender binary, which is male and female. Bi, to, male, female. Non-binary means those two things don't exist. So yeah, men and women are equal leads to men and women are the same. There is no difference. Genesis 1:27 says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them." So this is super, super simple, but I am the biggest fan of super, super simple. I think sometimes because we believe the Enlightenment idea that religious belief is superstitious and dumb. And so we feel like we have to go into these conversations being like, well, no, I am smart. Like, I do know, I'm not a big dummy, like the other Christians. Like, I know that's what you think, but I am a big fan of just what the Bible says is how it is. And if you want to know what a man is, if you want to know how you were made and what you were made for and who you are, that's how it all starts. You go back to when you were made. So it's really, really simple. Who is man? What is man? Man is made by God, made in the image of God, and man is male and female. So none of you are generic human beings. You are either human males or human females. That's what the Bible says. That's who you are. And then we know, I'm just going to go ahead and make it clear, we do know, as an extension of that verse, we know that men and women are different. They're not the same. So we know because God, he designated these two different types of people. He didn't just make one type of person. But we know that women and men are not the same, and there's no accidental mistranslation where it's like, oh, it was an accident that male and female got put in there because that's culturally what they believed at the time. We know that women are different from men because they were not made at the same time. They were made after. They were also made from man, which Adam was not made from another person, but Eve was. And we were made for a specific purpose. We were made after Adam named the animals in the garden, and there was this examination, and it was like, oh, we're missing something here. So, to help man, that was the purpose that she was made. Alrighty. So that was the conclusion of what does feminism produce? It produces a false anthropology of man. Doesn't answer the question who we are, what we are, and that's pretty basic. You really got to figure that out. If you're gonna go on a philosophical journey and make philosophical promises about knowledge and existence, you better be able to figure out who you are and what you are. We tend to skip over that a little bit, though. Okay, so the next thing that feminism produces, the next fruit of feminism, is envy and discontent. That's really what this whole thing is about. It's about women, even from a very long time ago, which we tend to think of them as so pure and so innocent, but women looking over at what men have and saying, what you have is better, I want that. And then discontentment is, I feel like, kind of the vehicle that turns you into a victim that can get you there. But so, again, this is from Rosaria Butterfield. It is from 5 Lies of Our Anti-Christian Age. And she's actually, when she defines envy, she is talking about transgenderism, the envy between someone who is one gender but wants to be another, wants the things of another gender. So that is very interesting. But I used her definition for the sake of this talk, especially because it's so fresh in my brain. We're reading it right now. But she says, envy, biblically speaking, is a self-destructive passion that insatiably drives a person to desire another's gifts, possessions, or achievements. And then she goes on to say, it's the false entitlement that says, you may possess that which justly belongs to another. So, of course, a second ago we were looking at creation, the dominion mandate, all that good stuff. And we see that men and women are not accidentally created differently. So, like I said, when woman looks at what man has, whether that be she's perceiving that he has some freedom because he can leave the house and not stay home with children, or if she is just straight up desiring to be the leader of her household, that's envy. That's her wanting something that does not justly belong to her. And envy is in the list in Galatians. Envy is in a list of things we are meant to put off, things that are the opposite of the fruits of the Spirit. We do not be envious. Envy poisons. So someone once told me that jealousy is wanting what another person has, and envy is taking it. So I do want to make that distinction. Envy is not just like an inner man emotional thing, it is a physical thing. And I think feminists have proven that. So if envy, the act of taking what doesn't belong to us, is the destination, like I was saying, discontentment is kind of the vehicle that gets you there. Being discontent or joyless is the best way to convince yourself that you are a victim, deserving of the things you don't have, right? Because the whole point is equality. The things you don't have are what lead to inequalities, systemic inequalities. So being a victim in this world is the best way to take what you want. And that kind of leads to our conversation about reparations that we're having. So I want to remind everyone, I want everyone to remember that it was the feminists that fed us all the fuel for the discontentment and the envy. It was the feminists that told women that your potential is not realized by having children and serving your family or your church. It's not realized unless you attend school. Again, philosophy, they make claims about the nature of knowledge and existence. You're not free. They're the ones that said, you're not free. So we need to determine if we believe them, right? But it was also the feminists that told us to sow our disappointment deeply. That's Lucy Stone right there. Man, was she the morning star. She said she would make it her life's goal to make sure every woman felt disappointed in being a woman. That was her life goal. She did it. It's really quite that simple. And then, of course, what I probably could have done is just given you another quote, because this quote really just says it all. This quote like levels me, but I felt like I had to give you some of my own words. So this is an Elizabeth Elliot quote, and I just have never quite heard it so plainly put. It is for us women to receive the given as Mary did, not to insist on the not given as Eve did. Okay, so my final fruit. Am I doing good? I'm doing pretty good. I don't even know when I started, so I have really no standard of knowing how long I've been. But this is the last one. So the final fruit is just a bit of lighthearted. It's destruction and death. So first, I'm going to cover destruction, which is, you may or may not know, the end goal of feminism and intersectionality. Real destruction or deconstruction of the system is the goal. It is meant to destroy a culture so that it can be rebuilt. And this is what happens all back and forth through society until the Marxist utopia. And the reason I call it Marxist is because that's who it's from. Not making that up. That's just what Karl Marx believed about the world. That was his philosophy. His claim about the true nature of knowledge and existence was that the world is made up of unequal opposing groups, and that they are meant to struggle back and forth to infinity and beyond until everything crumbles so much that power no longer exists. So if the struggling is happening, that's how you know power still exists. You got to keep going. You got to keep destroying. And again, really, is there anyone that accomplished their goal more than Karl Marx? Okay, so yeah, I just want to be clear that deconstruction or destruction really, really is the goal. Even though they have spent so much time building this, remember 1792, but that is the ultimate goal, is to level culture. All right, and so finally, feminism produces death, which is really its crowning achievement. Abortion is not a byproduct. It is an intentional, I really mean that it's crowning achievement. It's what it's meant to do. Just like the point is for everything to deconstruct, the point, this is the point. This is the reparation. So we have all these perceived inequalities going back throughout all time. Women in subjection to men, being abused, having no protection, all these things, right? All these things that we are fighting against, all these wrongs, all these systemic things we can't, they're so ingrained in our society that we can't, even if you do think you like women, you really don't. So how do you say sorry for that? How do you apologize? Abortion. It is the ultimate apology for inequality. There is, we talked about how men and women are different, but there is one unavoidable, irreconcilable difference between men and women. One of us can't carry a child, and the other one can. There's no wiggle room. I know sometimes there's conversations about that now, but that's not the case. So men and women are biologically unequal because a man cannot become suddenly pregnant, but a woman can. Now, you do need to challenge that part of the narrative because no one becomes suddenly pregnant. Yeah, so, right, I was gonna say Mary at least had a warning. What this means is that women are vulnerable to this affliction, and it's not fair because it can happen to one of us, but not the other. So that needs to be made right. So, to the tune of 64 million children, that is how we have repaid women for the lifetime of oppression that we have inflicted on them, that has been inflicted on their identity status, the group that they belong to. We're talking about perceived abuse from women that aren't alive anymore, and we carry that, and it really exposes feminism for what it is. The best word for feminism is bloodthirsty. That's really all there is to it. So I really do think that it's one of my favorite things to talk about because it can be so covert sometimes. Even when we hear something like 64 million children, we still somehow want to give people the best, like the benefit of the doubt. Summer and I, oftentimes we get questions, actually we're recording an episode on it tomorrow, but we get this question that's like, well, but wasn't feminism kind of this net gain? Just overall, like if you like lay it all out and create a formula and a point system, like wasn't it good that women had increased property rights? Wasn't it good that women could get educated? Wasn't that good? No, there is nothing in that equation that is going to allow for the equaling of 64 million little souls. It just won't, and it's not, it wasn't, I say bloodthirsty because it wasn't an accident. Feminists and intersectionalists ask for reparations. They're saying it needs to be made right. And that's what abortion is. That's what they wanted. They wanted for it to be made right. So abortion truly is the goal of feminism, which is the equality of men and women, the sameness of men and women. Neither has to carry children, right? So that's what it is. There's not, how do you end something on a note like that? Because it's really, really tragic, but we can't hold hands with it, and you can't play nice. You can't play nice with something that's bloodthirsty. So we just gotta call it for what it is. So I don't exactly know how to end, but I guess since we're all friends now, we'll just call it the first of many conversations about feminism and the faithfulness that can combat it. So thanks everybody for coming.
Right, we'll go ahead and officially end the meeting. I'm sure Joy would be happy to answer any questions that you have after that, so we'll give some time for that. For those of you who have not had a chance to meet yet, my name is Sherwin. I'm the chapter director for the Tech chapter of Ratio Christi. Ratio Christi, Latin for Reason of Christ. We are, as we say here, an unapologetically Christian apologetics organization. Our goal is to bring thoughtful Christianity to Tech campus. And so we want to bring in speakers like Joy. We want to deal with the hard topics, and most importantly, we want to engage the campus and the community with the gospel of Christ. So if you are a student at Tech, regardless of your belief, you can be part of and be a member of Ratio Christi. Cannot be an officer or serve in leadership, but you can be a member. Our meetings are open to anyone, and so feel free to invite anyone. We typically meet in a room down the hall, but we meet on Thursdays at 5:30. We cover various topics, feminism. I recently did a series through, what last one I did? Word Faith, yeah, I did a critique of the Word Faith movement. That's actually on our YouTube channel. You'll go to YouTube, Ratio Christi, Louisiana Tech University. We put some of our meetings up. We also hosted a seminar on transgenderism last quarter with Alex Ray. That's also on our YouTube channel. And you can follow us on Instagram at Ratio Christi LaTech. If you'd like to learn more about the chapter or get involved, some of our officers will be on the back wall. Feel free to talk to them. We'll get you set up with our group meet, with our Instagram, and so on and so forth. Or you can talk to me afterwards, and I'll be happy to give you some more information on the chapter. So I'm going to close this in a word, and then if you have any questions for Joy, take some time for that. Gracious Lord, Father, we humbly come before you this evening and ask for wisdom. Lord, as we seek to navigate these pressures that the culture tries to put on us, Lord, to cause us to compromise your word, both intellectually as well as in practice, Lord, I pray that you give us wisdom to recognize where these things deviate from your truth. Lord, give us a boldness and a backbone to be able to stand firm as we boldly proclaim what your word says. May we do so faithfully, and Lord, in doing so, may your name be lifted up and glorified. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Give the floor back. Any questions?
Okay.
You said near the end there that the feminist movement was not a net positive for society. Do you think that there could have been another way for the early feminists to go about bringing about those positive changes that didn't come with all the negatives that feminism that we know did?
I do think that. I always think there is a way to protect women from abuse. Because that was the whole narrative that was being propagated, which is that women needed these rights because the law didn't protect them from abusive husbands. I had mentioned too that they were heavily involved in temperance and prohibition. That was a big part of that. They had this fundamental belief that men were just all drunkards and they would abuse their wives. So they thought, like, let's just get rid of alcohol. But I really do think, even back as far as the first wave, what you're really dealing with is the issue of envy and discontentment. I'm not saying there weren't abuses where men took advantage or were not accountable for their bad behavior. We know that was happening because that happens. That is sin. But I believe that feminism is a the reason we often want to hold hands with feminism is because it is a pragmatic approach for people who are not Christians and who are not in churches. Because there is an abundance of protection for women who are in good standing at solid churches, because their pastors will hold abusive men accountable for their actions. And if there is no repentance, then they'll care for the woman. They care for the victim. And so I would have no expectation of, a lot of these people were Unitarian, they were not Trinity believers, they were not real believers. They were a part of churches, but they were not real believers. So I really do think this was their secular solution, like changing the law to regulate man's heart was that they had no way to regulate an abusive man's heart. I would say the proper way to regulate a man's heart is through the word of God and through accountability and counsel from his church. But so I sounds cliche, but the best thing for a person who's not a Christian that's being abused is for them to become a Christian and be new and receive the protection of a good, solid church. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay. Anything else? Yes?
So I have a friend who is a Christian, and I don't doubt that she is a Christian based off of what she believes and what she practices.
Mm-hmm.
But in the same breath, she calls herself a full-fledged feminist as well.
Mm-hmm.
How do you sort of can someone sort of do that? Is she misinformed? How does that sort of work?
I do think, the nice way to put it would be that she's misinformed. I think that, again, there is this, our culture very much wants to just handhold with everything. We don't want to just outright say, that's wrong. It really depends on, here I am defining feminism for myself. Hopefully I'm doing it accurately with some kind of objective standard, but that tends to be how people view feminism. What is it to me? And so that does mean that you can have an abundance of beliefs related to feminism, but they're incompatible. Like I said, feminism, and that's why I push that feminism is a philosophical ideology. It is not just a, how do I feel about it? It believes things, it claims things, it is a belief. And so I do think, I disagree with your friend, but they truly are, they're incompatible. One of them believes the Bible, the other one doesn't. And this is just kind of the thing we're dealing with now is what things can mesh and what things can't. And feminism and Christianity just don't, they're incompatible. And some of that I do think is ignorance of the history, and some of it I think is our desire to see the best and always give the benefit of the doubt to everything now, but there are some things that you can just get rid of.
Do you think at one point they were compatible, and if so, when did that change?
I do not believe they were ever compatible, because I believe that the real root of even the first wave was discontent and envy. Those are not fruits of the Spirit. They're actually things you're meant to put off, and if you're producing them in your life, you don't have the Spirit. So in my mind, that plus the fact that even like the first wave, like I was saying, some of the first wavers attended Christian churches, but they were Unitarian or had some anti-gospel belief. Also, I think further evidence of that, even now, is that you have gross mishandling of the text in order to kind of shoehorn feminism in, and the Bible just doesn't. It's very similar to gay Christianity trying to get shoehorned into the Bible. It's just not based off of the most basic written meaning of the text. So yeah, but I'm not saying your friend's not a Christian. I just really think some of us have growing to do, and we think we can hold hands with certain. That is definitely that is something that is so common in our culture. We just want to believe the best, which I honestly think gracious assumptions of other people and things is great, but some things, once you know about them, you know. So yeah. Yes.
You mentioned modern years, and I wanted to ask you, how much do you think our contemporary Christian culture is being influenced by feminism, and if you want to get more specific facts?
I think it's highly influenced. And I mean, honestly, the reason I think that is because I mean, you guys asked me to come here specifically to talk about feminism, And there are ways that I feel like I'm still discovering how feminism shaped the world that I grew up in. And I'm not saying I have like little bits of feminism rattling around, but I do sometimes think of it as like sweeping the cobwebs out of the corner. Just because by now it really is so in the water. I think that, and I tried to bring up a few things there. I would say on the issue of like submission and just authority in general, our culture has a really big problem with those. Yeah, just those were really the times I mentioned modern ears. Like it really, the narrative was so successful of the first waivers that all of this was to prevent abuse because abuse was so rampant and widespread. We hear that and we're like, oh, but oof, like I don't know how to feel about that because what I was told. So I really think that if you wanted to call something systemic, it really would be feminism. Feminism really has, because it's so philosophically, it's such a influential. It's so philosophically influential, and it was influenced by a lot of. I mean, there's like a whole talk that could probably be done on the philosophers that have gotten us here. It just to the point where, so I'm not going to bore you, but like Rousseau and sort of social contract theory, even just us believing that we shouldn't have to consent to anything that we don't choose, that includes being born, that includes are you a girl or a boy, we really do believe, some of these things we have been so influenced by that we really believe that we should be able to choose everything. And if we didn't choose it, then it's an injustice against us. So it's in there. Not saying that we all have to believe it. And we can all be discerning enough to know, oh, that doesn't sound right. But that's, I had mentioned, like, you have to remember that it's feminism that told you that your position is lowly. So I think that's really important, is just, it's like, you told me that, but was that true? That wasn't really true. But yeah, so hopefully that answers your question.
First of all, I love your talk. That was awesome.
Oh, good, thanks.
Second, like you mentioned, like the culture sort of like portrays this sort of like androgynous, like there is no male or female. And then I also know some Christians who like have a very sort of strict view of femininity. Like, what would you say is a good biblical definition?
Oh, whew, that's another talk too, probably. But I think so. So obviously, yeah, over here, feminists would define biblical femininity as having babies, looking pretty, and being at home barefoot in the kitchen, right? And then, of course, somewhere over here, you may have like long jean skirts, head covering, which I do have a bandana on right now. And you can't see my ankles, but so yeah, we have like kind of extremes, and then you may have many opinions in between. But okay, so what we typically say on the show is that the ultra, almost like you have to dress like a Puritan, and a woman is just a baby carrier, those are both boring. Those are unimaginative, and they ignore the text in some ways. This is such a common question. Ultimately, what it comes down to is we would love to have, those of us who are faithful Christians, we would love to have a list of, like, I just do this, and this, and this. And then everyone will know my fruit, And I just don't think it's quite as simple as that. I think femininity is clear. It's clearly defined in Scripture. And I'm not saying that it's complex because you are free to do whatever you want and still call it feminine. But I do think we're given many examples of what a woman looks like in Scripture, and often those examples include having children, being married to a husband, the opposite order of what I just said, getting married, having children, a gentle and quiet spirit, modesty, which everyone's like, oh, but that has to do with what I wear, right? But really, even in Timothy, where they talk about that, they are talking about your physical appearance, but a big part of that is just the desire to make the church service about you, which can also happen in the inner man as well as the outer man, right? But so yeah, so she has a family, she's gentle, she's modest, and working very hard, usually. So I do think that while there is freedom to decide what some of those things mean, those are the things for me. Gentle, submissive, modest, mother, wife, which of course you don't, like, you can, I'm not going to get into the backstory of what I'm thinking right now, that's too long. But you don't have to be married and a mom to be feminine. But I think that being a mom and a wife exemplify and highlight what it means to be feminine. So those things are self-sacrifice, serving in the household, meeting people's needs, anticipating people's needs, making people comfortable and satisfied, taking raw material and turning it into something beautiful. So there isn't a list, but hopefully that helps somewhat.
If I may, there's
Uh-huh.
a book put out by Canon Press
Mhm.
called Eve in Exile.
Oh, that's a great book.
It's
Yes.
an amazing book on question. And my daughter read it. Eve in Exile.
Yeah, that is a great book. Yeah, definitely recommend that book. That's very good. Anything else? Will?
What do you think this like 300-year push of feminism is? Do you think it's like whenever this wave gets everything they want, quote unquote, or do you think it's whenever people just say no? Like where's your mind at on where?
Well, so there's sort of two options. I tend to be a bit more optimistic about things. And then I know people that are a little bit more pessimistic about things. So, like I said, the goal of feminism really is deconstruction, so that could happen. And because it's so closely related to Marxism, it really does have economic and political consequences and all that. It could be bad. I'm a postmillennialist, so ultimately I believe that Christian faithfulness wins out. I do also think that I think feminism forces secular philosophies, bad philosophies. If you're willing to think about them, they will force you to know what you believe, and they will reveal if you are really a Christian or not. If you cannot hear truth and you cannot live according to what you believe, you will eventually not be a Christian, which means we can properly evangelize you better than if we think you're a Christian and you're sitting next to us in church. But yeah, my optimistic view on it is that it will continue to reveal who loves themselves and who is envious and discontent more and more until you have a clear divide of Christians and non-Christians. And then those Christians will take over the world because they're happy and joyful. I don't just mean happy, I mean joy and discontentment. Like those are the opposing parts. And joy isn't something you conjure on your own. It's a fruit of the Spirit. It's a gift. And it's not pretending to be happy. It really is satisfaction in all circumstances, which means that even if things do get bad, we can be content. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, good. All right.
I've heard whispers of the beginnings of a new fifth wave of feminism that supposedly has more of a conservative leaning than the previous iterations.
Oh.
What are your opinions on that?
Interesting. Okay, yes, I know something about this. I do know some things about this. Yeah, we're talking about our like Daily Wire, PragerU ladies that are not Christians, but they are feminists. Or they're not Christians, but they're not feminists. Okay, yes, I know what you're talking about. And I think that ultimately what it comes down to for them, well, I appreciate what they're doing. Those PragerU and Daily Wire are incredibly influential. So I do appreciate them not spreading the heresy and bloodthirst of feminism, but they still do not have the proper standard. And so ultimately, when it comes down to it, we're going to have differences. I was talking about like hand-holding. There are some people you can hand-hold with, and some people you can't. It really just depends. This is another one of those things that you like have to work through on your own. That is an interesting thought of that being a wave. I mean, feminism is all basically been like self-professed and ID'd. So I guess all it would take is for Pearl to come out and say, like, I'm the fifth wave, and I'm not a I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting. But yeah, if you don't know, if you don't have a good answer for what is man, who is man, if you don't have that anthropology, you may be saying true things that are good, but you still don't have that foundation that's really necessary. Because of course the goal wouldn't be to, it's like, okay, so now you believe that men and women are different. I've convinced you of that, but that's not a saving gospel. So ultimately the goal should be to turn people away from feminism and bloodthirst to the gospel. So yeah, that's a good question. That's something to think about. Okay, yeah. That's good. Anybody else? Okay.
This is more like a curious one, but has anyone ever called you like a sexist or a woman hater or an impressed? Like, have you ever had conversations and get that sort of thing?
I have been called a pick-me. Which, for those of you that don't know what a pick-me is it's like a girl that tailors her personality to be attractive to men. So you like say all these very hyper patriarchy things because you want to impress men. I have been called a pro-reproduction, and I was like, sure. That was meant to be an insult. I didn't take it that way. And then, of course, one of my favorites, when I was working for Apologia and End Abortion Now, we were called a bunch of baby lovers. I was like, as opposed to, but yeah, so I've never, I probably have been called a woman hater, but not to my face. So, yeah. Well, cool.
Let's enjoy another round of applause.
Good job, honey. We're gonna get some pizza with these guys. Yeah, like everyone goes out and gets pizza.
Oh, nice. Okay, that sounds great.